Good morning, student. Today we study the process of drying and ignition of the precipitate. This process is very important in the gravimetric analysis. So let us begin with the drying and ignition of the precipitate. After filtering and washing off the precipitate, it is brought to a constant composition before it is weighed. For this purpose, the precipitate have to be dried and ignited. So the main purpose of the drying and ignition of the precipitate is what? To get a constant composition of the precipitate, and for that purpose we are using the drying and ignition process. Generally, the drying and ignition process selection is depend upon the nature of the precipitate or the impurity which is present in the precipitate. These two processes are differ only on the basis of their temperature. So let us see what do you mean by drying. When the temperature employed for the process is called is below 250 degrees Celsius, this operation is called as drying. Let us see what do you mean by ignition. When the temperature employed for the process is between 250 degrees Celsius to 1200 degrees Celsius, this operation is called as the ignition. The precipitate which have to be ignited are collected on a filter paper or porcelain crucible or silica filtering crucible. So next we have to study the process of incineration after drying and ignition of the precipitate. Generally, the process of incineration are of two types. The process of incineration first is with the filter paper, and the second one is the process of incineration without filter paper. So, in the first case, first of all, we have to filter our precipitate. After filtering the precipitate, it is collected on a filter paper. After collecting the filter paper, we have to dry or ignited our precipitate. That depend upon the nature of the precipitate, whether we are applying the drying process or the ignition process. After drying and ignition of the precipitate, before starting the incineration process, we have to first measure the weight of the empty gauge silica crucible. Okay, after weighting the silica crucible, it is employed for the heating process. Then actual incineration process gets start here with on the in the silica crucible. We have to place our the filter paper containing the precipitate. Then we are heating that particular crucible. First in first case we are kept the lid of the crucible partial. After some time it is get completely covered. After covering the precipitate, it is get heated for a longer period of time till the filter paper get removed and the ashless ppt get present in the crucible. After getting the crucible ashless ppt, that ppt get cooled in the desiccator. Here is the diagram of the desiccator. So after placing the particular precipitate in a desiccator, that particular precipitate is cool in that particular desiccator. The role of the desiccator is what? It does not allow any moisture to get absorbed into the precipitate. So after that, the collected precipitate is weighed into the balance. This process of the heating, cooling and the weighing is carried out till we get the constant weight of that particular precipitate. This is overall process of the incineration. So let us see. So student, in the incineration process, we are remove the ashless filter paper. You know very well that here we are using the Wattmann filter paper. The Wattmann filter paper is generally useful for the gravimetric analysis. So the Wattmann filter paper is ashless filter paper. To remove that Wattmann filter paper and impurity which is present in the precipitate, the process of incineration is carried out. So in that particular process, first filter, then dry, then weight of the crucible, then empty crucible, then ignition process is carried out, then drying, then collection of the ashless precipitate. After that, put that particular ashless precipitate into the desiccator. Again it is get place onto the cool into the desiccator. After that it is again weigh. This process is carried out, cooling and the weighing process is carried out generally till the we get the constant weight of that particular precipitate. So student, let us see the process of the incineration without filter paper. This process is generally used for those precipitate which are reduced by the burning of the paper. Means with the burning of the filter paper, there is a change in composition of the precipitate. Therefore, the process is carried out without filter paper. So here the example of that particular process is precipitate of the barium sulfate and lead sulfate or copper oxide or bismuth oxide is generally carried out or incinerated with this particular type of process. So here the main difference with the filter paper and without filter paper is what? First of all, again here the precipitate which is get collected on the filter paper is heated to 100 to 105 degrees Celsius. Means that particular filter paper is placed into the oven up to temperature 100 to 105 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. After that the residue is separate from the filter paper onto the watch glass. Again the same process is carried out from the weight of the crucible, weighing of the empty crucible, then weighing of the empty silica crucible, then heating of that particular precipitate, removal of the impurity and moisture from the precipitate, then collection of the precipitate put into the desiccator, after that cooling, and then again weight of the precipitate. This overall process is carried out till we get the constant weight. Once the precipitate remove the moisture, the filter paper that is collected separately is get burned and it is again put onto the particular silica crucible till we get the ashless precipitate of that particular process. So student, in today's lecture we are study the steps incineration process into the gravimetric analysis. So generally to collect the precipitate in the gravimetric analysis we have to carry some steps. First step is what? Preparation of the sample. After that precipitation of that particular sample. Then digestion process is carried out, then filtering and washing of the precipitate. After that we carry the drying or ignition process. Then weighing of the precipitate is carried out in the incineration process, and after collecting the sample we are calculated that particular sample into the gravimetric analysis method. So student, this particular process you have to perform into the practical. Generally in inorganic chemistry practical you are perform the gravimetric analysis process, and this process you are carried out practically, and at that time you are getting a very brief knowledge regarding to the incineration process practically. So student, if do you have any question regarding to this particular topic, you can ask into the discussion forum. Thank you.